All right. Welcome, everybody. I tried to pick a new music bed. Is this too vibey for a Monday morning?
No, I think this is where people are actually at.
It sounds like the intro of a Sabrina Carpenter song.
I was just telling Shelby I didn't know who that was until like Saturday.
So I know who that is because we just recently took our oldest through Girl Meets World, and she's in that.
That's what Shelby said. So are all these really famous singers now just from Disney?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm the least connected. I'm still just listening to Hans Zimmer on Spotify.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But did you know one day, a couple years ago, we went on a cruise with my family, and we were based out of San Diego to go. And so we stayed at a hotel the night before going on the cruise because you have to kind of be there early. And we're at this hotel, and Sabrina Carpenter was doing a concert in the hotel. It was small. It was like maybe 100 people. It was before she was big. I looked her up on Spotify. I'm like, who is this person? I thought it was so like indie, but not the cool indie.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever. But then I was surprised because the venue looked like it seated 100, but there was like 500 people there at the door waiting to get in.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, maybe this person's kind of a big deal.
How long ago was that?
2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I think they were Girl Meets World fans that are excited about her pursuing. But when I looked her on Spotify, like I really remember her having 15,000 monthly listeners, which is nothing to balk at, but also
compared to Taylor Swift, that's like
yeah. But I guess now she has millions per month.
Makes sense.
I did not know that this is how we would start.
Yeah, we'll cut this later, but keep that music going.
No, it's a long song.
Yeah,
so.
They all are.
This isn't, let me be clear though, this is not a Sabrina Carpenter song.
We're not trying to get sued by Disney.
We actually have the rights for this song through Epidemic Sound.
Sweet.
So everything's fine. How is your Monday morning going so far? Do you love Monday mornings?
Sometimes.
That's such a great answer.
Sometimes.
I loved my Monday morning today.
I think right now, with the stage of life we're at and the lack of routine because of our kids, Eden is going through a sleep thing where she's now afraid of the dark.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. So, and then Abel, for a long time, was waking up at 5 on the dot. And now he decided to sleep until 6, but now Eden's up at 5.
Oh.
So my Monday morning is just
chaos.
It's not even chaos. It's like we're sitting with the kids, which is nice. It's a nice calming way, but like I want to like go to the gym and read and like do a bunch of productive things. And it's always hard to plan for that if you're not sure who's going to wake up when, if Shelby has to go do something, like she had to go into work early today. So it depends sometimes.
Yeah, this too shall pass. I remember that. I had a very...
Are you talking about the song or my situation? Because the song is still going. There it is.
No, it's not.
All right.
Oh, I hear some buzz. Is this... You want to... It was you. Okay, that's better. No, my Monday morning was productive. Teaching Bible class in the junior high really threw off my morning routine. So now that there's no school right now, like my 5 to 10 a.m. every day is like the same. Oh, that just makes me so happy.
Yeah. The same?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Well, the same, but not.
Yeah. Well, you could do the same thing.
So like I'm reading, but the reading is different on like a Monday versus a Thursday. But yeah, like 5 to 10 is my time.
Good for you.
Except you're here at 10 o'clock.
10
See?
o'clock.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah. So I used to hate Mondays, but I figured out ways to get the rhythms. Anyways, that's not how we were supposed to start this podcast. Do we just not even include that whole front section?
Sabrina Carpenter, Mondays. Yeah, timestamp that.
Yeah, right. Okay, so how did Sunday go in your mind?
Good. Sunday was good. Yeah, it was good. We had a lot of people. Good Father's Day.
We had a ton of people in the first service. The biggest first service we've had since going to 2 services.
Yeah.
Not including Easter.
You're right.
But then second service kind of compensated. That's what happens when you have Father's Day.
Yeah.
Go to first service and then go to lunch.
Right. Or brunch or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was good. How'd you feel about Sunday?
I thought it was a great day. I was very encouraged. 2 visitors that were fun that I knew were coming. One, my parents came, which is very uncommon because they run their own church. And so my father's taken 5 weeks off. He does that every summer. And so kind of like a mini sabbatical-ish. And so he's never seen the setup, never seen the school. So that was fun on Father's Day too, which is neat. And then the other visitors that I was excited for, again, I'm excited for every like actual visitor, but these are people I know they're not coming to our church. Anyways, I don't know what to call them. Visitor, guests, special, whatever.
VIPs.
VIPs is a church planter couple in Colorado. They've been following my YouTube journey since like 2018. So we've known each other a long time. We've only commented. I was on his podcast once, so it was cool to see him in real life. They planted the same time as us.
Nice.
In Aurora, Colorado.
Did someone from, someone else was supposed to come, right?
Yes.
Were they not there?
They didn't realize how far Scottsdale is from Queen Creek.
Ah, fair.
They're like, oh, an hour away. I guess the part of Scottsdale they're in. Because I'm like, technically you can get to Scottsdale maybe in 45 minutes, especially on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
But I don't know what part of Scottsdale you're in. And they're like, it's
Scottsdale.
over an hour.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they went to a different church. But the lead pastor, so Chase Jones is the pastor in Ohio. Yeah. I've been to his church before. We don't partner together financially, but we partner together relationally. And he wasn't the one coming, but one of his elders was, and the elder's wife is the admin for the church. So nice. I know of them. I was excited for them to come, and they didn't come.
They came all the way from Ohio, but didn't want to.
Yeah, so I told them to fire. They're fired.
Yeah, they're done.
Yeah, so that was good. Worship was just anointed as usual.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see my signal to you?
No.
I said, smile.
Yeah. Maybe we should talk about that. Why I have such a weird stage presence.
Yes, go for it.
I just don't like attention. I guess there's nothing to talk about. But I was scarred I used to make all sorts of faces when I first started doing worship in college because we had a sort of a ragtag team of misfit musicians all coming together to play whatever instrument they had, brought with them. So banjos and cajones and foot stompers and harmonicas, and sometimes funny things would happen. Vocalists would try things and something would just go wrong and I would just crack up. Like I would laugh. So my emotions were very apparent, how I was responding to a song. And that got distracting. And so everyone's like, you can't laugh at this person when they do this thing, man. You gotta. So at some points I would have to like kind of turn around and play, and it was really bad. So then I guess I just got used to standing there and not making any faces. I don't know.
Wow. It's sometimes my goal to make you make a face.
Yeah, but then I laugh and people are like, what is he laughing at?
And then they're distracted. Good point. One more thing on that. Isn't it interesting that you guys, the word for band is to play, that you guys play together? Instead of perform, I think it speaks to like a musician's heart. Like we're just playing here.
Like we're playful. Like
like kids go on a play date. You guys are just playing.
Well, you play an instrument. You don't perform an instrument.
No, isn't that interesting though? That in our vocabulary we decided. Yeah. For instruments, it's playing.
It's playing to play an instrument. Yeah, I don't know why that is. With the etymology behind. Interesting.
What's the etymology behind etymology?
Yeah, we'll cover that next week.
All right. So today we're going to cover probably like a behind the scenes process. Today's kind of a special episode that we're kind of worried about doing, and if it doesn't work, then we'll just
scrap it,
not upload this video.
Yeah.
So
nothing to lose. So
the next practice we have,
we're kind of picking this up in the middle of a conversation that we were having right before we started recording. So is that where you're going with this? We're just going to keep talking about that? Yeah.
I feel like I hear the buzz again. Something, you know what? My kids were playing with this right before. That's what I get for being a good dad on Father's Day.
Unbelievable.
Okay, look at that picture frame. Isn't that really cool?
That is really cool.
That's my Father's Day gift.
Who made it?
Somebody on Etsy.
Oh.
My wife hired him.
You were like, yeah, Trinity did that. It was incredible.
If she did, man, we have a moneymaker on our hands. No, okay, so we have our next practice is generosity.
Yeah.
So you and I were kind of going back and forth. We always... what we do is we read a ton of different books. I don't know. Sometimes you join in the process. I'm ahead of you right now because I've kind of just been doing it on my own. But we read a ton of books on generosity. We get a bunch of different perspectives, or whatever the practice is. At this point, it's generosity. And then we try to boil it down into 4 weeks. And let us be clear. We know we're not covering everything in 4 weeks. The peacemaking practice, we know people's whole lives, like their jobs are to like counsel and to help people with making peace. So we just try to give you enough of a overview that helps you not be so overwhelmed, right? Like we don't want this to be a 16-week series because then you'll never go back to it. You never really think it through. But we hope it's an invitation for you to go deeper into it. But it's also enough after 4 weeks, you can at least begin participating.
Yeah. The end goal of all of these is to find ways to integrate these practices into your day-to-day life. And if it's a 4-week, and then the other idea is that it's a progression too.
Right. So like what's a good example
Sabbath.
of the Sabbath?
So step 1 was just stop. So pick a day or a period of time if you can't do a full 24 hours and just stop doing things that you'd normally do. Stop working, stop wanting, stop worrying. We use that paradigm.
Just stop it.
But set aside, don't worry about what you're going to do. Just do anything but the things you normally do. And then week 2 was, okay, now that you've practiced stopping, add something. So add some things that bring you delight or rest. Find things that give you rest. Okay, now add things that bring you delight. Now add things that make you worship God, orient you back to God.
Yeah, so it's really fun to do that progression. And I think the peacemaking practice was that, right? It was forgiving your past. Forging new patterns, framing your pain to fulfill your purpose. So there has always been a sense of a progression. And so right now we're going to wrestle with, probably in front of you, what would be a progression of generosity?
What we've talked about, and this is what I was going to say right before we started recording, is one thing I've learned, I think, through these practices, starting with, I think, simplicity and on, is that the ideal that I think we want is like, it's a big ask, I think, to get people where we hope that they will end up after engaging with the practice of generosity or with peacemaking or whatever. What'd you drop?
It's fine.
Okay. So something like generosity is tough because, like, what's the end goal? Is it like asking people to jump from not giving at all to giving 10% weekly, like the standard tithe? And we'll even wrestle with that some. What is that biblical? Is that not biblical? But that might be like a huge ask for some people. So like, what's the progression? How do you start with like something? Because the week 1, ideally what we're doing is tapping into like that inner ache, like tapping into like the desire that they have, that this practice can be a means to an end to fulfill that desire. So like if week 1 is kind of tapping into the ache, like so what we're talking about is this mammon idea, like generosity is a way for you to detach yourself from things that might control you, like money. How do you tap into that and then get someone to the point where they're like, you know what, maybe I do want to try this out.
Yeah.
What's like the very first baby step that you can take? Is it like making a budget? Is it like journaling? Like what you had said, like write down, what is it you're losing if you were to commit to giving 10%? Other than that money, what else are you losing? Are you losing, like, do you have to give up some of your material goods? For some people, that's like a huge ask.
So we're jumping up. We just covered a lot there. So let me kind of peel it back. Because the hard part is some people's story is that they went from giving nothing to 10%.
Yeah.
And so it's like, we don't want to present in such a way where we say that's impossible.
No,
so let's just try to get you to go to 3%. What do you think the average is actually of evangelicals in America? The percentage they give?
2%.
It's I think it's 2.8 or it's 3.1, something like that.
Nice.
Very close. So in all of these practices, what we're trying to do in this progression is we're trying to call people to maturity. So it's that balance as a pastor of saying, okay, I know we don't want to condemn people, but we also don't want to be just so comfortable where everybody's at. The hard part of a leader is disappointing people at a rate they can handle, like getting them to grow, getting them to stretch. And so much of that responsibility on us, first of all, is the Holy Spirit doing what only he can do. But as pastors and communicators, I think we have to do a good job of, first of all, living it out ourselves. But we also have to do a good job of tapping into the ache and showing, like, no, this is the best way to live. Like, I love Psalm 119 just over and over. It talks about how his commands are a delight. Like there's a reason he's telling us to do that. It's for our good in every sense of the word. It's for the good of those around us. It's for the good of the gospel being spread to the ends of the earth, but it's also for our own good and betterment and joy. And so I always, like, when I come to the end of a practice and look at how do we communicate it, I think there's been a few of the practices where I was like, we're always going to be like, I think it's our job to be self-correcting without being self-condemning. So I'm not condemning myself, but it's also like, oh man, maybe I could have spent a little more time to convince people this is the good way. So I think when we're looking at generosity, I think we're trying to balance what is a progression we could take people along, but also how can we always show us this is the good life. I know when I first started pastoring, I was terrified to ever talk about generosity and giving, because when people first started coming to our church, they were not believers or whatever, and they would tell me, hey, we just love how you don't make a big deal about giving. And I was like, thank you, because we wouldn't pass the buckets around, and we still do this, and I don't know if we'll change it after this practice. We wouldn't mention it on some Sundays. It would just happen, right? And it's also funny to look at our budget that first year. It's like, maybe you should have talked about it more, because we were barely making it. But I kind of took the advice of people who didn't follow the way and was like, okay, I don't want to turn them off. So, okay, that's great that we don't do that. But then realizing later, oh, that was their idol. So they're like, hey, we like it because you're not touching our idol. We want you to talk about this, that, and the other, but don't touch our baby. Like, if you talk about money, I'm out.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Your face, I was trying to figure out. I can never read you on a Monday
But you also
morning.
have to untangle like people who have been in experiences where like, it's like, oh, where I see where this money goes for this church. I don't want to give to that. Like,
Sure.
I don't want to. So like, how do you?
And there are legit examples of churches
Yeah.
doing it for the wrong reasons. So sometimes it's like, yeah, you're right. But I would take that so far as to say, well, we just won't talk about it.
Right,
Even I feel like you feel that pressure some Sunday mornings. Like you keep saying, we'll talk about it more, because it's such it does have a lot of baggage.
And I imagine the practice will give us space to nuance all of that.
Correct.
And especially as we go through the podcast and things like that. So that's more what I mean when I say that. Like, we're not going to give you a full comprehensive biblical theology of generosity in this
little moment.
1 minute invitation to give. So if you have questions, hold on to them. Because I think a lot of people do come from now giving to a church is like part of going to church. Like, people know that that's not a weird thing. If you show up at church and they ask for money, I think most people who have had any church experience know that that's not like random.
I think the turn off is when there's like a church announcement and say, hey, nobody's giving enough. Everybody needs to crank it up. Like, and I'm always like, there's no way the pastor said that. But when people talk to us, that's how they perceived it. That's what they heard. They're not grateful for the 2% I gave. They're saying I'm not.
Right.
But man, if you knew my situation, that was a lot for me right now. I'm leaving this church because they're not grateful for what I am giving. But then it's like, okay, I don't know your story. If everything you said was true, then that is sad. But are you blind to some sin? Are you,
It's tough because people have like, or they see like how pastors spend their time and money, where it's like, part of my harder, like I'm working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, so I can give you money so that you can go golf all 5 days a week and like
Which we do not do that.
But there's something about like there's a high responsibility being in the role of a pastor, where your salary is based on what other people are giving you for the work that you're doing. And if people see that mishandled, or that there's any like little bit of distrust that the pastor's contributing to, then I think that makes it really hard for people. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that those people who have had those bad experiences don't also need to be called out for whatever the idol related to their money is. Like, everybody has an attachment to their money.
Right.
And just because you've been hurt and seen it abused doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with that idol. You still have to deal with it too. We're just going to do it sensitively and at the rate that God is actually leading you to, not by beating you over the head saying 10% isn't enough, you need to give more, or whatever. 2%. Yeah.
And man, I want to jump into you're making me want to jump into how pastoral ministry is I think it's clearly harder than what most people would assume. And like being a 4th generation pastor, like my natural instinct is to root for other pastors and to be like, you don't know the full story. Even like the book I just read by Cal Newport, Slow Productivity, he argues one of the biggest mistakes, and this isn't pastoral realm, but he just says it's not helpful for us to compare and contrast blue collar jobs versus like, I forget the term he used, but essentially white collar or like, thinking jobs. He's like, the hours should be different. The compensate, like it is just a different world. So there's that where it's like, the scriptures are clear about like, hey, a worker is worth his wage. Paul addresses this to the church in Corinth about a pastor should be compensated. You also see Hebrews 13, like, hey, you should have like your leaders should be kept in reverence and to love them and to bring them joy and not heartache. So there's so much there. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's addressed in the generosity practice, or maybe I think a better way for that is for you and I to prepare to use it as a podcast conversation between in the middle of one of those weeks. Like, okay, let's talk a little bit more about just both sides of the argument on that.
Yeah.
Because it's so loaded. And I know even, and we've had this conversation bluntly, when I was a youth pastor, I was like, oh man, the lead pastor job's this easier. Like, in my purview, I was like, that's why does everybody make a big deal about it? Lead pastor's the easiest. And then the moment I became one was like, oh, there's just a weight and there's stuff that you can't put on paper that it does make it more difficult than when I was a youth pastor. So I get it, where if you're not in the job, if you don't know how it goes, and pastors, if they're doing the job right, can't really share a lot of what they're doing because it's so much private information of other people's lives and counseling and stuff like that. So, and what a terrible pastor if you're like constantly trying to prove to others, I worked a lot this week. Like that's not the way to live. So I guess let's move beyond that. But so far for me, I think, did I tell you there's like at least 3 concepts I wanted to figure out how to implement into the generosity series? Yes, right?
You did, yes.
Okay, so let me see if I remember them. And I don't think this is the right order. And this is us just kind of talking about it a few months ahead. So one is gospel patrons. So I just read a book by John Reinhardt. Bro, it's a very good book. And it's about all these famous pastors and evangelists. For example, George Whitefield, that we all know and like historically. And what's the guy who wrote Amazing Grace?
I don't know.
John Newton.
Oh,
yeah, John Newton, not Isaac Newton.
Yeah.
John Newton.
That was Francis Scott Key, but he wrote the national anthem or something.
I think you're right. So now, okay. What's great about that book is just talks about how you wouldn't know any of those people without the businessman or businesswoman that funded the whole thing. And it's really inspiring to see how some people, their calling in life is to just be really good at business and make a difference in that business. Like, a misunderstanding is to think, I only have a job so I can have money so that I can help the ministry. No, like your job is the ministry, right? Hopefully you're contributing somehow, some way to human flourishing. And you're witnessing to your employees, all of that. But it's amazing how money should be leveraged for the kingdom. And there's just some really good stories in there of really wealthy people realizing, wow, I'm going to be miserable if I hold this wealth to myself. And so they just learned how to leverage it for the kingdom. So that's 1 week. Just like, again, viewing giving as less of an obligation, which I actually don't think I think it's fine to say it's an obligation, because I think we need to remember we just have to be obedient. Like sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm doing this because it is my duty. Like as a Christian, you know what I'm saying? Like we've made duty such a bad word. I know you can take that far and become legalistic and earning and all of that. And it's a terrible version of duty. But sometimes it's like, yeah, there's things I do in my Christian life because I know I have to. And the reason I don't enjoy it is because of my own ignorance and sinful flesh. I need to do it long enough. I'll probably enjoy it soon enough, but I'm going to do it before I feel like doing it.
Isn't that true of all the practices though?
Yes.
Like Sabbath is a command. And so that's the only one I think you can argue is like, no, you have like,
it's the fourth one.
It's the fourth of the 10 commandments.
And it's the one God said, don't forget.
Yeah.
And we all seem to forget it. Yeah. So I think we're so scared of being caught in that camp. So, it's a duty, but also what a joy to use your wealth to expand the kingdom. Right. So that's 1 week. Gospel patron. I don't know how we're going to package that. I'm thinking of the word leverage. I'm thinking of the word patron. Thinking of, sign up on my Patreon. I'm kidding. I don't have one now, so I can say that on a church podcast. Oh, yeah. But then the other one I have is like purity of heart. I don't remember. It was some Puritan that said one of the biggest reasons you should give is to free yourself from the god of mammon. It's one way to like untangle yourself from that idol on a consistent basis.
What is mammon?
Mammon is the god of money, of wealth, right? You probably have a better...
not off the top of my head. I know it's the... was it the god or was it the word? The word mammon.
What about it?
Is it an actual like god?
Well, it's a master. So Jesus says you can only serve one master. You can't serve two masters. And he compares and contrasts himself versus mammon.
Sure. But like Zeus is a god. Artemis is a god. That's an actual god that exists for something. Was mammon like a god, or was it just the word that means money? What does mammon mean is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think the biblical text would argue it is a lowercase g god. It is a perpetual idol that's present in every single. But are you saying, is there like Babylon that was like, no, mammon's
yeah,
our
that's
thing?
what I'm asking. Like, is it like Artemis? They had a temple to Artemis. There was like hundreds of gods in Ephesus. Do you know if mammon was like a?
Just Google.
Okay. I didn't know if you knew. You said it.
Yeah, I would have said yes, but I can't say which people. So I almost want to say it's a Hebrew thought that when you see anybody worshiping materialism, we're like, oh yeah, that's called mammon.
Right. Okay.
I don't think it was like an Artemis.
Okay, you're right. It wasn't.
Okay, but it was well known that is a god.
Yeah.
That is what people worship.
Right. Yeah, I'm not asking if it is.
No, that's a great question. I never thought about it that way.
But I was wondering if it was like you talked about Simon, for example. Simony, there's a statue to him.
Right.
Is there like a representation, of Mammon in the ancient Near East?
Well, some would argue there is
all of the ancient Near East.
I remember somebody giving the illustration. You know that bull in Wall Street?
Yeah.
It's like that's Mammon.
Yeah.
Like it is funny how we still have our own idols, even though we don't think, oh, that's not like an idol. Like
Altars.
That's not an
altar,
item,
like a physical.
It's like, well, you know, we just do it differently.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I think Mammon, we have to cover that.
Yeah.
Jesus addresses it. Jesus talks about money more than any other topic, right? Money and hell. So like, woo. So there's something about that. But I love the idea, though. I think I'll say this. I feel the Spirit of God moving within me. I'm excited about preaching generosity, and I never have been before. Like it does bring a lot of fear typically to a pastor to think about generosity. But what I've been studying so far, I'm pumped about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, in a lot of ways, it's getting beyond the duty. So like the duties, you're right. There are things that we should do out of duty, but duty, getting to like, why is it a better way to live? Why are the commands of the Lord sweet? Like Psalm 119 says, like honey to our lips. Like why is it? When you start unraveling that, I think it's the same with anything that people don't want to do. Like nobody wakes up wanting to like eat healthy and run. Yeah. But when you look at like, no, this actually has benefits for you and you're going to live a better life. You're going to enjoy yourself. You're going to live longer, all those other things. It's the same with generosity, but and I am a little worried because I think we're touching on the same thing that we hit on with simplicity too. We're like
that's one series I wish maybe I packaged it better. That or it was just clearly that's just an idol, and it rubbed all of us the wrong way or the right way because it's such a pervasive
I think
idol for us.
Maybe we could have been a little more clear on what simplicity meant, like the actual practices and what the end goal was. And I think that comes with the nature of the practice itself. So like with something like scripture, you don't have to do a ton of work to show people why they should, if they're following Jesus, why you should read scripture. Yeah. But with simplicity and with generosity, I think there were more questions about, well, why is this what is this actually doing? What's the benefit?
Some practices is clearly we see, oh, that's a call to life and abundance. And other practices, this is a call to die.
Yeah.
In order to get new life. And I think simplicity and generosity, because of the God of Mammon, is so pervasive in our culture, and the God of comfort. This speaks against both of those idols, and so we need the grace of God to help us explain how this is not just a true way, but a better way.
I wonder if there's something about, because I don't know if Dallas Willard was the first to separate the disciplines this way, abstinence versus engagement.
Oh, right.
So it almost seems like the disciplines of engagement have been easier to sell to people.
Wouldn't you say simplicity is the abstinence and now the generosity is the engagement?
Generosity has to start with
doing simplicity.
Yeah, exactly.
So really these kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I thought hospitality leads to peacemaking.
And that's an engagement. So it was something that people could do. Even Sabbath is subtraction, but you're still doing something.
I also thought, remember, we kept saying Sabbath is the gateway, because I think if you do Sabbath well, it opens you up to reading the scriptures more and all sorts of things.
Being
living
generous,
from one book that I think was helpful is The Paradox of Giving by Smith and Davidson. And the whole book is just stat after stat saying, do you want to live longer and have more friends and like the good life? It consistently, the data says that's what happens to generous people. Generosity. And so it's the correlation versus causation argument and all that. And it really points out like, no, like generosity is such a turning point for people's lives. When they become generous, the world opens up to them. Now, the other thing we have to make sure we are combating is not, and I wonder if there's got to be a part in this series about we are not prosperity gospel people.
Yeah. How do you navigate that idea that, because a lot of people have that experience where they're like, no, I did start giving above and beyond what I thought I could, and God did give me a return. It is an investment. It's it just makes good financial sense. God will give you back tenfold what you give. So if you want more money, give what you have, and God's always going to bless you. People do have that story, and you don't like. I don't want to take away from that, but is that what's promised?
I think we view that as a proverb, not a promise, right?
Yeah,
like the Proverbs talk about, like the generous person, he receives back tenfold, has all the friends in the world.
Yeah.
The stingy person loses the very little they have. But I think it's helpful, again, to see this as a proverb, not a promise. So in other words, that's not 100% guarantee. So I think that's why the God of Mammon needs to be foundational. We're doing this as an act of worship, not as an act to further expand our own idols of comfort. Like, hey, I gave and now I have an even better house. I gave, now so the end needs to be God, not something we get from
a better
God.
house. Even like parable of the talents, like a talent was money.
Right.
And we think it's like your talent. I can juggle, so I'm going to juggle for Jesus, and then
then I'm going to get 5 more talents.
Yeah. But that parable seems to indicate that if you do something with your money,
to me, that parable is going to be under the gospel patron.
Yeah.
Where you leverage for the kingdom and even greater things happen. So yeah, that's where you have to really balance. Because I think, again, you don't discount some people's story, like you said. I think little stuff like that is why people are like, let's not even touch it. Let's not even touch generosity, because we just went black and white. And I think there's a lot of nuance, and it really does depend on the maturity of the person. And some people in the end of the day, they're just blessed with wealth and other people aren't. And it's like, the
rain falls on the just and the unjust. I think, you have to almost like demoralize it too. So, because in a lot of ways we live the same world as the Pharisees, where that sort of false Jewish understanding of wealth was that if you had more wealth, that meant you were in good standing with God. And if you were
we've completely reversed.
Right. If you were in poverty, then that meant that you were not in good standing with God. And I think we reversed it in a lot of ways. I also think we've kept it in a lot of ways. That if life is going well
depends
for
on
you,
what camp you're in.
Yeah. Or what success means for you. So to be successful by any other metric than you becoming a person of love who's able to love others because of your proximity to Jesus, if your idea of success is anything but that, then I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of like, if I have success, that means if it's growing, it must be going well. Or if there's a good product as a result of what I'm doing, then it must be going well. And God is clearly on my side. And if you're failing, God is not on your side.
Right. So we have to address that. So gospel patron, something like that, gospel purity. But also, I think we have to address, is tithing a New Testament command? Is it a New Testament assumption? So I'm reading a book right now on the 4 views of tithing. I'm in the middle of the 2nd view. And so I'm interested. I'm open to studying it right now and not declaring yet, like, okay, here's after all that I've studied, but here's what I have always operated from so far in my life, is that if that's the command in the Old Testament, that was kind of what do they say? Like, that was the ceiling. Like, man, get there. It should be the floor. Thank you. Is that how houses work? It should be like the floor. Like, hey, let's all start here and then go up. One inspiring story. So yeah, I think we're gonna have to study a lot of the biblical text, because you see Jesus talk about tithing, but it's usually in a negative light. But that's only because the Pharisees were using it as a way to earn. And so it almost looks as if, though, he says, no, you need to tithe and care for the poor and the needy and the widow. So it doesn't look like he's negating tithing. He's just saying, don't think that's the whole thing. It's a picture of somebody who's like, I can live my life however I want because I tithe. And he's like, no, that is not the way of Jesus. So there's a lot to unpack there. But one inspiring story to go back to that is Rick Warren. Think what you may about him. I am not in the business of defending or prosecuting pastors. I'm grateful for him. I've listened to like 3 sermons of his in my life, and it was always at a pastor's conference, and it was like so encouraging. But he had this whole thing where, because the Purpose Driven Life is like the best American book of all time as far as selling, So it's like just crazy how much money he made. And so he said, do you know why? And again, this goes to was that prosperity? Was that like, is God really in direct control of how much money you make? Like all those kind of questions. But his argument was, do you know why God allowed this book to be a bestseller? And he said, he knew what I would do with the money. And so he has this really inspiring journey of every single year, him and his wife decided no matter what, they're going to increase their giving percentage. And so now, as the legend goes, he lives off of only 10% and he tithes or gives. It's beyond, you don't call it tithe when it's beyond 10%. He gives 90% of his income. And then the cynic is like, yeah, but that's still way more money than I would ever make. But okay, whatever. It's still really cool. I really thought that was inspiring that every year, even if it was by 0.1%, they were going to increase as a family. So it showed faithfulness with few, and then he was able to be faithful with much.
Yeah, I think you have to, and I don't know if this is in the messages or in the podcast, but I'm wondering too how this relates to like early church ecclesiology. Because I think that's one thing we have to unpack for people is like, and I think this is, again, to go back to a lot of the real genuine issues people have is like when people are hurt by the way a pastor spends their salary or the way a church spends its salary as a result of our people's giving, you have to show like when Rick Warren is giving to his church, he's not just giving it back to himself for his salary or so they can buy new things or whatever. It's like the global church understanding, like the early church, when Acts 2 says that they shared everything in common. Yeah. Like that understanding of what the local church is as this like communal family that supports each other. You're going to go without need because even if you have a need, people in your church community are going to help meet that need. Yeah. And then to expand it beyond just our local church too, when people give to us, they're contributing to like kingdom work that's been going since the beginning of time. They're participating in something that saints throughout all of history have always participated in. So they're not just putting money in our bank account. Right. Which is what I think where a lot of the hurt comes from is like if churches communicate it that way, then it's really easy to take that in really bad directions. But if you show people like, again, the kingdom mindset, the gospel patron stuff, like what Rick Warren is doing, to increase isn't just so that your church can do better. It's so that God can use what you're doing and what you have to do what he's always done.
And that's a good example for him and his church. They officially support a missionary in every country in the world. So like missions is a huge part of their heartbeat. So that's great. That's another thing to talk about maybe on the podcast. Where does our money go? All that kind of stuff, which we talk about in membership. But the other part of it, the other argument within tithing. So some people say, okay, tithe is good. Malachi 3 throws a lot of people off, right? Like the promise, there seems to be a promise attached. Yeah. And then the question is that attached just to the people in that time and moment? Or is this so people like some pastors they don't even give that nuance. This is a promise. So there's a lot there, to unpack. So that's going to be fun. But in that text, it says, give a tenth to the storehouse. And so then, for example, like Tim Keller, he says the storehouse is just ministry in general. So it's the kingdom. So he says he believes it's fine. Let's say you give 7% to your local church and 3% to a specific missional organization. I think he argues it should probably be at least somewhat of the majority goes to your local church because that's where you're most involved and you can see the work of the ministry. But he believes it's fine for it to be beyond that. The storehouse, it could be, because that was like pointing to the temple. The temple is just one place. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Or that's just something else that we're going to have to dive into.
I think, it's tough to justify anytime you get beyond just the practice of generosity, it's tough to justify like specifically how much and when and where to give in every single context. But I think, yeah, there is something about like giving to your local church as a way to like associate yourself with that church. Like it's a way of commitment, and it's a way of you kind of giving up control and submitting yourself to like that community. You're saying, as long as I'm here, I'm going to submit myself to not just the pastors, but to each other. We're all submitting ourselves to each other, trusting that we're going to like make good with what we've been given. And with this generosity, we're going to be trustworthy with it. So to give to something that you have like more control over, that you don't have to submit to, where you don't have to serve, like it's easier to give money to like a missions organization or whatever that's doing really good work. And I think you should give to charities and things like that. But that's a lot different than giving to a community that you're kind of holding yourself accountable to, and that's holding you accountable, and that you have to share a meal with weekly, and that you have to gather with. Like that shows more of a detachment from the idol of mammon than I think just giving to. So yeah, I think that's more of a wisdom thing where we would encourage people for that reason.
Yeah. Well, then you just reminded me of another thing. So like you have the idol of comfort, but you also, it's to get rid of the idol of control. And one thing that I think is pervasive in every church is there's a temptation to say, okay, I'm going to give to the church, but I'm going to say where the money goes. So I'm not going to give consistently. I'm not just going to tithe to the general budget. I'm going to wait till there's a need. And I feel like, okay, I like that need. That makes the most sense to me. Let me give. Again, not to discredit, wonderful, but there is something about giving that just says, hey, I'm giving in an act of trust. Now, of course, the leadership, the church needs to be trustworthy.
Right.
But there still needs to feel like an element of like, man, I know one pastor of mine says, look, this isn't, how do they put it? He says, you're not giving to us, you're giving to God. And we're held accountable to God, what we do with the money, but don't think you all of a sudden have control of everything our leadership is doing because all of a sudden you wrote a big check. Like that was your offering to the Lord.
Yeah.
This is a whole nother bag of worms.
There's and it's tough too, because I always heard in high school, for example, in youth group, we were always encouraged to tithe with our time.
Right.
So that's another big thing too, is people say like, oh, I don't have any money, or I don't have enough money, but I have a lot of time. So my volunteering is my tithe. Like I'm serving through my tithe. And then in college, our pastor in college, they did a whole thing on generosity, and his whole thing was, if you're spending money, you can give money. Because we had a lot of students that were like, well, it's not my money. My parents give me an allowance so that I can go here to college and not have to get a job or whatever. And his whole thing was like, well, once they give you that money's yours. And if you're spending it, then you have money to give. So if you spend money, you should be giving money. And there's, I think, yeah, the time versus like the money's not mine argument all comes down to like this idea of control, that I want to control where it goes and have ownership over it. And yeah, giving anytime you sacrifice, it's an act of trust. Yeah. Like to sacrifice is to put yourself in a subservient position where you're trusting whoever you're sacrificing for over your own good. And that's,
it's an act of weakness, like what we said yesterday. Yeah. Like it's an act of brokenness. Like I'm not in control of the situation. That's the heart of worship, but that's hard for us.
Yeah. So I think that's what makes generosity really tough, is it's all about trust.
Yeah. I just see it's so easy, and we get it, to be cynical about giving and to be cynical about churches. So we have the 3 so far, trying to figure out what the 4th would be. Again, it's like we're trying to think in terms of progression. We're trying to think in terms of, sure, there's a million things we can address. And so what I've been doing, and again, we're not officially doing any of this right now, but this has kind of been birthed from reading books, but also just going over and over through the words of Jesus, what he says about money and wealth and giving. And so if you were to throw a 4th one out there, do you have one in you?
I mean, all of mine are really conceptual. Like, yeah, like I almost wonder if there's if it's worth doing something specifically on, like, you get to the root of like our attachment to money, security, control, because that to me is different than mammon. It's like the mammon is like what you can get. It's comfort. It's like status and what you gain. But the other side of that is exactly that. It's the Matthew 6, the anxiety. Like the root of a lot of anxiety is, according to Jesus, this like building up for yourself. And I think Luke makes it more clear when he does his telling of the Sermon on the Mount, which is where this teaching comes from. He follows more specifically, I think, Jesus' teaching on anxiety with, so give, like when you give, so there's a connection between like the anxiety you feel and your need for control. To counter that is the practice of generosity. So it is freeing, not just to like loosen yourself from needing material wealth, but loosen yourself from like just anxiety in general. I don't know.
I like Henry Nouwen's, you remember like his 3 idols of the heart kind of, so I am what others think of me. I think we can use money to try to bolster that up. I am what I can do. So it's like, oh, I know that I'm really good at my job because of how, so we find some ego there, and then I am what I have.
Right.
So that's like probably the security type piece. But I think the other, this maybe isn't the fourth, but there is something to say, again, to tie into how to make friends and love other people. Generosity is a huge way to make friends and love other people. You know, like it is connected to others.
Yeah.
And I think it is kind of funny how I think it's okay to say, this is where I struggle. We can be misunderstood here. This is a podcast, but sometimes I'm like, you know what? I think it's okay to say, yeah, you support your pastors. Like my child, you know, this is, you know, like, hey, my child's in cheerleading, whatever. Thanks to your generosity. Like my kids can have like a bit of a, can do stuff in life because like you're generous. Thank you. You know, because it's just funny how like, remember to humanize us as pastors. Remember to like think of our kids. So I'm fourth generation. So my grandmother, you know, was a pastor's daughter, pastor's wife. You know, she's the connecting piece. She grew up, she wasn't allowed to have anything. She never learned how to swim, never learned like all sorts of things because it was really thought of, oh, you're the pastor's family, you should be barely making it. And if you, modern day example, if you have a Keurig in your house, we're giving you way too much money. Which would make you, you know, Keurig, right? But so I think there's something, I don't know how to address that. But again, and I get it, but because we see the celebrity pastor abusing wealth, but I just think of the pastor's kids, and I think of like, man, I don't know. And this is why I have joy trying to do more and more bivocational activities, so I have less guilt making money, not doing a good job at it. But like I want to set up my kids for success, and I want them to be able to, I want to give them a good wedding when they get married, stuff like that. I think that's okay to say out loud and not be guilty thinking that.
That's the flip side of what I was saying earlier, where people see pastors who abuse their time and their privilege that they have to not be accountable with their schedules or whatever, other than to God, which is a whole other thing. But the flip side of that is to say like, well, if we give you money, like you can't buy anything nice or whatever. But yeah, people forget that like this is a job.
Yeah.
Like this is it's a calling. Sure. It's I'm shepherding, I'm serving, I love you all, whatever. But like I'm clocking out at 5 if I can, you know what I mean? Like if I don't have anything on the calendar, I'm not, you know, like it's a job. This is how I make a living, and this is how I feed my family, and Shelby works, and we have kids that, you know, are going to need, you know, things growing up. And like, it's the same way that you know, work for a living so you can give your kids things. This is what we do for a living. And
yeah, the more I have kids, well, I'm done having more kids, but the more I parent, I less and less demonize money. I realize money is neutral. How we love it, how we use it, leverage it, I just think about, I have 3 girls. I like for them to have a vehicle at 16. That is not possible right now. And that's okay. But, you know, so it's just like, I should be saving for that. How do you? So there's a lot there. And I think it's just good for pastors just to remember to humanize us. I asked my grandma, what do you wish you did different? Or, you know, what advice would you give to me as a pastor? And she was like, honestly, don't feel guilty for giving your kids good things, you know? And the other thing, I'll just say this because we're just rolling now. Almost every vacation I've ever gone on was a gift. So like people are like, oh man, we paid them so much. Like they went there. It's like literally, it's either those stupid timeshare thing I had to sit through, or somebody's like, hey, I have this place. So it's like so much of what if I ever go somewhere, like somebody's literally paying for the whole thing. So yeah, people make assumptions like, oh, well, if they're traveling so much, they must be making X, Y, and Z. But I also don't want to get to the point where I feel guilty taking a vacation, you know?
Yeah, if you did have to use your money to go somewhere.
Yeah. And I've always kind of felt like, hey, don't worry. Like I've told people this was all a gift. Like I just don't worry, you know? And again, some people were probably thinking, I don't care about this. I have no sympathy. This is dumb. But
no, I think a lot of it comes down to, and this is a podcast for our church, so hopefully people know our character. But I think that's the
good point.
That's the defining thing, is if you're serving and loving the people well, and people feel not just like fed intellectually, but like nurtured and shepherded, then I don't think anyone's going to bat an eye if we, take a day off or, go on a cruise or whatever.
Right. But I just wonder how many other people, and maybe put it in the comments, ever feel guilty doing those things.
Sure, yeah.
Or is that like a uniquely, it's probably not, but like maybe more than most careers, pastors feel guilty taking vacations.
Yeah, I think...
does an electrician feel bad when they go on a vacation? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. I think people who work in nonprofits in general probably struggle with this.
Good point.
Any career that's focused primarily on others and where you get paid for doing something good that should be like intrinsic, like you should. I think a lot of people
donation based.
Yeah, donation based. Yeah, exactly. Same thing with support raising. So a lot of my salary for a long time, which we haven't talked about, was based on support, which I still am grateful for and rely a little bit on. But that gets really tough. And anytime you do any sort of like development training on how to raise support, there's a lot that you get taught on, like what is wise spending. Because there is an element of like, look, people are giving you money so that you can go and be a missionary on this college campus or in this field.
Right.
So you don't feel bad for spending and enjoying your time off, but also be careful because you do have eyes. I think that's the difference. Is like this is what distinguishes
we are
it from
stewards.
Exactly. When you pay an electrician, or when you work for like a job or whatever, you're getting a salary, but that's very like a salary is different from like a donation. So when your salary is donation based, I think there are higher standards and there is a little bit more accountability with how you're spending your time and those resources. So I don't want to say that it's exactly the same and be like, we can do whatever we want,
Yeah.
But because there is an element
we're all
like,
accountable.
Yeah.
To how we spend our money.
Especially, being a support, raising my own support. I had to tell people like, here's how I spent my week and here's the hours I worked and here's what I did on my day off. And, if I'm getting money from people who support me and I say, I worked like 10 hours this week. They're like, well, maybe we should cut back on some of your money.
For our first 3 years of our church plant, my salary was supported by the network, the Send Network, and I had to send them my budget, had to send them what we spent money on every single month.
Yeah.
Had to spend them kind of my hours, generally success stories, stuff that didn't go well. Cause there was like accountability, like, hey, we're giving you this much money. You were going to make sure you're not wasting it. And so, absolutely. I wrote down stewardship as a week, but I thought that's kind of tied to leverage, but maybe not. So I don't know. Stewardship, budgeting, that could be a week in and of itself. I don't know.
Something like really practical maybe on. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we're hitting probably the hour marker here. So I think that was a fun conversation. Just how the sausage gets made. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to know how the sausage gets made. That's the phrase.
So we're going to scrap all of this and do something completely different by the time.
Yeah, don't hold us to these four that we've mentioned so far.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, we're proud to pastor this church. Is that that's a good thing to say. We're proud to steward this place.
Why would that not be a good thing to say?
Because, pride.
We're proud.
Yeah.
We're perfectly content. We're neutral.
Grateful for you. If you got this far, you're great. Comment below. If you got this far, comment below. Caleb loves to smile.
Nice.
All right. See ya.